On today's episode of the Raise podcast, I spoke with Lynette Marshall, the president and CEO of the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. This episode was recorded on March 18th, 2020, and we were both adjusting to our new work-from-home environments. I loved learning about Lynette's journey from a fifth-generation family farm in Illinois to becoming one of the most highly respected advancement leaders in the country. I hope you enjoy this conversation. Here we go. Greetings, Raise audience. It is a privilege today to host Lynette Marshall, the president and CEO at the University of Iowa Center for Advancement. Lynette, welcome to the Raise podcast.
Thank you, Brent. Good to be with you.
For those of you who may be catching this via video, you would see that neither Lynette nor I are in an office. We are all in the midst of our new transition to a work-from-home context in light of COVID-19, the coronavirus. Lynette is in Iowa City, right? And I'm actually in Rhode Island today, and so we're all adjusting. In fact, yesterday was the University of Iowa Center for Advancement's first really fully remote day. Is that right?
Right. So yesterday we asked everybody who could work from home, who didn't absolutely have to be at their desk or in one of our buildings, to do that. Iowa City's been a bit of a locus for the cases in Johnson County. And so we are trying to be especially vigilant in light of that fact and in light of the fact that we've got a major academic medical center here in town.
Well, in light of all of that, thank you, Lynette, for making time. And we will absolutely touch on current events, but at the same time, I think it's important for our audience to understand the backgrounds and the trajectories of leaders in the field. And I would really love it if you'd be willing to share the summary version of your journey, and then we can dive into some of the specific parts that I think are really relevant for the group. But my understanding is that we share an upbringing in a relatively rural Midwestern context, and we both were early participants in the 4-H club and the FFA. And so with that, I will kick it to you. Who was Lynette growing up, and what led you to go down this path of philanthropic leadership?
Sure, thanks. So Lynette growing up was the fifth generation on a family farm in north central Illinois. The farm was settled in the early 1850s by my ancestors, and that's always been an important and proud part of my background. I went to a small rural school, Sparland, grade school and high school. I graduated with about 27 people in my high school graduating class, and was one of two from that class who went off to college. I went to the University of Illinois and majored in agriculture, and really had a magnificent experience there. As you say, I had the benefit of 4-H and FFA when I was growing up. And
Lynette, I'm going to pause really quick as we all adjust to work from home. Soren, can you just show Lynette that we just got some light bright? Donner, can you show Miss Lynette what you made?
The Legos.
Okay. Awesome. You know, my husband said he feels like he's doing Legos in the garage, but his toys are kind of different. He's got woodworking toys. So
yeah.
Do you have any erector sets? That's what he said his toys felt like.
Well, we will edit around that, or we'll just keep it in, but we're all navigating. I did want to ask, so fifth generation farm, 27 students in your graduating class. I graduated with 67. We were a huge class by Postville, Iowa.
By comparison.
but two people who went to college. You don't probably show up your senior year in that context and decide you want to go to college. So you clearly had something along your journey where that even became a goal, which at the time had to seem wild to some of your classmates, or just totally out there. I mean, when did you know that you wanted to go to college in the first place?
You know, it was always an expectation. There was never a day that I remember making that decision. My parents always had that expectation for me, My mom was a registered nurse. And while my dad went off to college, he lasted 6 weeks because then he got sick, and his dad also got sick, so he had to come home and help run the farm. And so while my dad didn't have the benefit of a college education, my mom, was like many women of her era and was either a nurse or a home ec teacher or a regular teacher. And yet it was still very much the expectation. So I was fortunate to have that, and to have really, considering how small our school was, a lot of cultural benefits from my family and, some other families in the community in terms of 4-H and FFA and high school activities. We were a very small school, but we had lots of activities to keep ourselves busy with.
And so tell me about, I guess when you're fifth generation family farm, maybe 4-H and FFA is even more of an expectation than college for many people. And so what were those experiences like? And I'm curious, I served as president of our 4-H club when I think I was in 7th grade. And I feel like that was my first leadership experience.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
conducting a meeting with my company today versus conducting a meeting, in 4-H, there's a lot that we learned, and I know you did as well, but what was that experience like?
So I wouldn't say this if our audience were faculty members, but there's been many a meeting I were in with faculty where I wished they would have been in 4-H. Those meeting skills, they were just part of what we did, of course, in 4-H and FFA, but that really does, I think, provide a terrific grounding for someone. And I did the typical things in 4-H. I did cooking and sewing like girls did then. I was in a girls 4-H club, and there was a similar boys 4-H club, and my mom was a 4-H leader for part of the time I was growing up, and all my 3 siblings all went through 4-H and FFA, and we all got a great deal from those experiences, whether it was public speaking contests or meat judging contests or horticulture contests or parliamentary procedure contests. It really was a great youth leadership activity, and I'm happy and proud to be able to continue supporting the National FFA Foundation with some of my volunteer time now.
Do you still have your FFA jacket?
I do. Do you?
Me too. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
My mom has done a good job hanging on to all of that, and it comes in handy from time to time on Halloween if I'm in a pinch. So
you'll have to go to the national convention sometime and wear it again.
I would love to. And so you had the opportunity to go to the University of Illinois. Was that a difficult decision, recognizing that you knew that higher education was going to be a part of your future? And why did you choose Illinois, or was it pretty straightforward? And then how did that experience unfold?
That actually is a great FFA story as well. I was fortunate enough to be in the state public speaking finals for FFA one year. And there were 3 finalists, and I came in 3rd out of 3. And the day after the competition, I went to one of the judges who was the assistant dean for academic programs in the College of Agriculture. And I said, what would you suggest? What could I have done better? I'm going to do this again. I was a junior, and it was between my junior and senior year in high school. And he didn't give me any speaking tips. He recruited me. And within about 30 minutes, I called home and I said to Mom, I'm going to go to Illinois. And she's like, what do you mean? I thought you didn't have any interest in going to a big school. No, I'm going to go to Illinois. I'm going to do this. And so it was, that personal connection as a result of somebody who took their time to volunteer to be a judge for a public speaking contest. And as it turns out, then I enrolled in the College of Ag, and my student job, I worked for 4 years in that office of academic programs. And then that's exactly how I got into fundraising. The fellow who ended up being the associate dean that I worked for 4 years became dean at the time I was graduating from college. And Part of his hiring package was the ability to create a fundraising position, which was one of the very first ones on the University of Illinois campus to be associated with a college. And he encouraged me to apply, and I got it. And I haven't done anything since.
That's amazing. So
yeah, it's a great
tell me about
story.
year one of that first time that the new fundraising role is created. I'm sure advancement wasn't even a term. I mean, what did you do? What was the goal? I mean, did you have a list? I mean, how did you even get started?
Yeah. Boy, they paid for a lot of learning. And it was on the job completely. So I distinctly remember arriving at the office on December 9th. It was my first day, 1983. And I had an office, which was lovely, that they gave me an office. My window was a window well, and the view out my window well was the trash dumpster for that building, for Mumford Hall. But it was also just an empty old gray desk and a typewriter, and that was it. And the dean was traveling for a week. So I thought, well, now, what do I do? So like any good networker, I thought, well, maybe somebody else does this on campus, having no idea. And I did find that there were 3 other people who had something a little bit similar. All 3 of them moved into fundraising from other jobs, though. So I made appointments with both of those. And my student undergrad job had been working on behalf of a scholarship program in the college called the Jonathan Baldwin Turner Scholarship Program. And so I knew there were donors to that program. And I thought, well, maybe I should call those people. So I sort of called them cold and talked. And at that time, donor records for the college were on 6x8 cards. And prior to my being hired, it was the job of the least senior secretary in the dean's office to type in on those cards when somebody made their $100 Dean's Club payment. And I didn't have any access to the university database. Every time I needed information, I had to call someone at the University of Illinois Foundation and ask them for donor history or whether a gift had been received. And that went on for years, honestly, because this was really at a time when the University of Illinois was transitioning from a centralized University of Illinois Foundation being the only resource to raise money to the colleges starting to hire their own staff. And that has evolved now to the place where most of the actual institutional fundraising happens in the colleges at the University of Illinois, with the University of Illinois Foundation being a central resource of really superb fundraising staff and great colleagues. But there are more people now on campus than there are in the University of Illinois Foundation.
So you basically self-onboard, you come up with your own training program, you talk to donors, which I love that idea. I mean, good for you for being unafraid to pick up the phone. And I think if all else fails, do stewardship and you learn something every time.
Like today.
Yeah, like today. Well, I'm sure we'll talk more about that. But I don't know, what was there a moment early on? You knew you loved Illinois. You obviously cared about the ag program. You got pretty connected as a student, but did you really get hooked early on? I mean, was there anything in connecting with the donors that made you think, wow, this could actually become not just my first job, but my career, or was it more organic than that?
You know, I think it probably did kind of come about the way you describe over time. It fits my interests and skill set and passion so beautifully. I remember going to a newcomers case conference session early on and kind of recognizing that it felt like a calling. You know, different folks are called to different sorts of things, and I felt like my own experience in benefiting from a remarkable public higher education experience at a really affordable cost at that point in time. I put myself through school from savings and student work and scholarships. And, you know, I have always been deeply, deeply committed to that mission of public higher education. and its accessibility and availability to people. So it probably wasn't more than 18 to 24 months when I really felt like, this had no idea it existed, right? I mean, no idea whatsoever, but my life sort of prepared me in unique ways to come to that. And lucky me to have gotten to do it for 35 years or so now.
23 at Illinois, if I'm not mistaken. So from 83 to 06.
Yep.
And I'm curious, when you think about, I don't know, highlights or lowlights, I mean, you went through some very difficult times for the ag community during that journey, some very good times as well. But also you went through a complete transformation from 6x8 cards to where we were, let's call it, by the mid 2000s. And so just curious along that journey, if anything really stands out as being a favorite memory or a really unique donor visit, or just what stands out when you think back to that time?
Sure. Well, when I think back to where things were for Illinois and for lots of peer institutions, let's say the Big Ten, because that's what I'm personally most familiar with, I think the foundations and the fundraising organizations and the universities really understood that they needed to really ramp up fundraising work. And that probably, it was considered fundraising work at that point in time. We weren't talking about the term advancement, and different institutions were doing it in different ways. Some already had existing foundations. Some, like Michigan, were part of the university organizational structure and institution itself. Some were parts of research foundations, but over time, the institutions kept investing in hiring fundraisers. And that, of course, came with people who did major gift work, people who did events and communications and outreach, marketing, communication, sometimes for example, for the college. And then my experience, uniquely enough, actually, was that, by year 4, the dean actually said, it wasn't the dean who hired me, but the second dean I worked with said, Lynette, I'm going to put the Ag and Home Ec Alumni Associations in your shop. And at that time, they were sort of part-time staffed by retired faculty who were helping, and we had a really robust Ag and Home Ec alumni program. And so all of a sudden, we became an advancement shop, and a few years later, actually started calling ourselves that. And so I would say maybe 15 years, maybe 12 years of my time in ag, we actually were an advancement program, completely collaborative, and everybody attending the same staff meeting and, dealing with the issues that are out there. So I had a really great experience with that. And by the time I left the College of Ag in 2002, we probably had a dozen full-time staff and 4 or 5 student interns that worked with us to help accomplish our work.
Versus recent graduate Lynette and a dean.
And the empty desk. Right. So that was, that was a joy. And honestly, that job and the one I have now are the highlights of my career. That job for ag was fabulous.
So
Go ahead.
You grow up 5th generation family farm in Illinois. You get connected via FFA to the University of Illinois. You go, you're a student worker, you get the job out of school, and you don't look back for 23 years. And then you join the University of Iowa.
Yeah.
Could you have foreseen that? At what point, in all seriousness, it is very common for people to start working for their alma mater, right? And it is that passion. I was a beneficiary of the experience. I can sell the mission. I can speak authentically about the programming. But then at some point, there really is a professionalization of the sector, and people have career aspirations. And sometimes if you want to achieve your career aspirations, it requires making moves to other institutions that are frankly rivals. And so I'm curious Was that a quick decision? Was it a difficult decision? Did you just feel ready? And how do you, I don't know, help others think through the trade-offs between continuing with an organization you know so well versus reaching higher, even if it means going elsewhere?
So a really important question. And I would say, honestly, the first 22 years of my career, I never could have imagined leaving Illinois. And I have shared this in a variety of settings, you know, like at the Big Ten Fundraising Institute or other places, but I wouldn't have left Illinois if I didn't have to. And I think one of the realities of someone's career path is that sometimes you come up to a place where you're working for a leader who doesn't respect your expertise and who doesn't want to work with you. And that's the position I found myself in 2005 and 2006. And it took me a long time to decide that my only option was leaving my alma mater because I was no longer in a supportive work environment. And that was really, really hard. I tell my friends it was harder than my divorce because it was, you know, just this expectation that I had of always working on behalf of an institution that I felt so committed to. But made that decision and actually interviewed at a number of different places for some super interesting jobs, trying to sort of figure out what that meant to me. I interviewed for the top fundraising job at the American Red Cross in Washington, D.C., and for medicine at Yale, and for a Nature Conservancy principal gifts job. And I came home from every one of those and called them back and said, I'm really sorry, that's not what I'm looking for. And I realized that I was a Big Ten girl. I really needed and wanted to stay in public higher education. I was questioning whether I wanted to stay in leadership even at the time because, you know, my self-confidence had taken a hit. And I was working with a terrific executive coach who said, no, I think you need to give leadership another try. And then found out about the potential opening of the position here at the University of Iowa, and that my predecessor, Michael New, was ill, and that he was on medical leave. And so I was able to wait until that position became open, and lucky enough, here I am and have been for about 14 years. So,
well, I'm grateful for your willingness to share so openly. And I do think at times, you know, we've spoken with other people where that relationship with the alma mater, when you're not also employed by the alma mater, can be so much more pure and just reflective of your college experience. And then when you're sort of inside the belly of the beast, you know, there's a lot more to it. And I know many advancement professionals have to wrestle with kind of that passion and love of the institution. But then the reality is it's not about the institution. It is about individual leaders, and the importance of individual leaders is so paramount in any organization. And I'm grateful that you're willing to share so openly. And I am curious though, when you got to Iowa in 06, yes, it was a Big Ten institution, but it's a different institution. It's a different context, no ag school. And so kind of what did you walk into, and how did you even think about getting to know the institution, the culture, the deans? I mean, what an overwhelming, I mean, from my vantage point, to try to get to know so many things. And then I'm sure as you started meeting donors, you probably, like in 83, started calling up some of the big donors to try to get to know people. And they probably expected you knew everything about the place relatively early on. And so just like, what was that transition like?
Yeah. So I remember distinctly the feeling of being at Iowa and thinking after 6 weeks, I know all these problems. I get all of these issues. None of these problems are new to me, but I don't know any of the players. I don't know my staff. I don't know any of the donors. I don't know the university administration. I don't know what it's like to raise money for a hospital and medical organization. I don't know anybody at church. I don't know anybody at my kid's school. It's a lot, even for a person who
and putting on a face
networks.
of cool, calm, collected.
Right.
Yeah.
And coming into an organization. So my predecessor, they didn't open the search until he passed. And so the whole organization, he passed in April and I came in August, and the organization had had interim leadership for 18 months from the board chair. So a volunteer had been serving as chair of the University of Iowa Foundation board. And so then I come in and everybody's still pretty sad. That's a lot to grieve when you have someone who had been an internal candidate. I'm only the third president of the University of Iowa fundraising organization. So Daryl Rywick was the first for 30 plus years. And then Michael New was promoted internally into the presidency and only served for about 6 years until he passed. And so that was really hard on the staff. And coming in and trying to honor him and his legacy and his important role. They had just finished a campaign 9 months before I started. And so there was a lot to do and a lot of healing to help with, I would say. And I don't know that I was able to do that very effectively, but it was something I thought about a lot.
Also, from a timing perspective, you joined really right before the financial crisis started.
The financial crisis, and oh, by the way, an historic flood in the summer of 2008, right. That we're still, we're in the midst of building the very last building that needs to be replaced from the devastation of that flood in June of 2008. Yeah. And
so as we are in the midst of another crisis here, coronavirus, COVID-19, and we are in the early innings, so it's even by the time this is published, there will inevitably be, new headlines that we cannot even guess at this point. But when you think about the, I guess, community level challenges that the Iowa City, Cedar Valley went through during that flooding, compounded by the broader financial crisis, I am curious if there are any lessons or reflections you have that could be relevant as we are now in the midst of another unforeseen crisis.
Well, I don't think I have any insight that other folks don't already have, which I think is what we've been saying to one another in various ways online over the past 10 days or so, which is stay connected to your people. So those of us who are in leadership roles, I think we have to recognize not only our own grief and uncertainty and displacement, but also clearly that of our staff. And so thinking about that, and then also staying close to our donors and prospects. COVID-19 feels quite different to me than the financial crisis did. We were impacted, as everyone was, from the financial crisis, and we took certain measures with regard to employment. We didn't have to lay off anyone in 2008, 2009, but we did incentivize voluntary resignations. We cut people's benefits, the contributions we make to their retirement. We cut that in half for about 6 months. We didn't have raises and some of those sorts of things. Those are all financial implications, which we aren't yet anticipating for the Center for Advancement at Iowa anyway. We're fully intending to, as long as possible, obviously, keep all of our staff on board, and we hope being able to return to something a little bit more normal. This feels, so much different in terms that it's really a health scare for people. And what we're trying to express now is that our families, our employees should understand that their families are their first priority, and especially in this first week where people are working from home, and folks don't really understand what their daycare situations are going to be like, and we aren't going to have school until mid-April, and the university isn't going to bring students back. this semester, and commencement's going to be canceled. So the safety of all of us feels very different than the financial emergency. Both quite critical, of course.
Yeah.
And never mind, we've got, whatever's happening in the stock market on top of the pandemic,
Right.
Which is pretty chaotic.
So first and foremost, try to take care of your team, take care of your key supporters. And obviously we're in a bit of a reassessment phase, and, everything, is on the table. I do think what is clear is that, we are fitting 10 years worth of behavior change in a sector that doesn't change very quickly into about a 10-day period.
Right.
Thought of we did a webinar a month ago debating whether gift officers should be remote or not.
Right.
And now virtually every gift officer in America is remote instantly.
And their support team.
Everything, right? We had an institution reach out saying, hey, we can't, our fundraisers can't access the database because of the VPN connection. Is there anything you can do to help out? So it's just shining a light on how, frankly, poorly or well prepared we are to adapt. I think that without a doubt, there will be a long-lasting shift in the way that we work, in the way that we think about donor engagement, in the way that we think about, is it okay to engage a donor via a video call? A month ago, we might have said, well, no, we need to go see them. Now we're saying it would be irresponsible to propose going and seeing them. We never could have anticipated that, but I do wonder what the long-lasting implications will be for the sector, some of which I do think could be quite positive.
Well, and it's interesting because I think in 10 days from now, we'll all be smarter about how to do video calls too, right? I mean, I spent 3 hours yesterday, trying to figure out how to do some of that because it isn't something that I typically am responsible for or engage in. And so not only will we understand that better, but I'm guessing our donors will too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that, while it would be premature to suggest a silver lining in the midst of so much turbulence, there are going to be changes, and hopefully we can make the most of those changes, whether it's about how we engage our colleagues, whether it's about how we engage our donors. Are there ways we can even enhance the donor experience by leaning on some of these remote capabilities more broadly? So lots to learn there, and we're excited to go down that, to go on that journey together. I did want to ask you, though, one of the things that has struck me in getting to know the Iowa team over the last couple of years is not only are you an incredible, highly respected female leader in the sector who happens to be female, but you also have a very strong female leadership team, which is just so rare in this sector. And I would love your perspective on that. I'm sure you're asked about it, in many different forums, but you were one of the if I recall, the first woman to win the public speaking award at FFA. I don't know how many women have led advancement organizations like you have, but as you think about your broader team and stewarding female leaders in the sector as they advance their careers, I'd love your perspective on that.
Sure. Well, I was fortunate to inherit strong women already in the organization, and I'm deeply grateful for that. I inherited strong men in the organization as well, and I inherited a practice that was called, working decisions through what we call the management team, which we now, or management group, and now we call it the leadership team. But one of the members of my leadership team is a woman who was the chief financial officer when I arrived at the organization, and she has since been promoted to the chief operating officer. She supervises pretty much everything that isn't fundraising or alumni engagement related. And we have recently hired a woman as the head of our IT because she was the best candidate, and a woman who's head of human resources because she was the best candidate. Other members of the leadership team include a gentleman that we hired who had a lot of great experience in Minnesota and Utah and California. He covers our main campus development. And then the woman who covers all of our health sciences has been on our staff for 20 or 22 years maybe, and was promoted up through the ranks. And then the final person is, again, someone who we hired in as responsible for donor stewardship kinds of activities. And she has been promoted through the years to have a much wider responsibility, including all of our alumni engagement activities, donor activities, events, and that sort of thing. So, you know, it wasn't an intentional action on my part to necessarily develop a female-oriented leadership team. Previously, the top two people in development were men who were in place when I came, and they've both retired. And so some of the women have been brought in these roles from outside organizations, and some of them have earned their way up to the senior position in their areas just as a result of their great work. At one time, it was kind of fun. Actually, at the time of the flood, Sally Mason was the president of the University of Iowa, and there was a female provost and a female vice president for research and a female mayor of Iowa City, and I think 5 or 6 female deans at that time. Now, we're not in that particular gender balance right now, but Iowa is a place, I think, where women are really welcomed and can thrive in leadership roles, and no one thinks twice about it. So that's been a real joy to experience at the University of Iowa and in Iowa City in general.
And outside of your core leadership in the Center for Advancement, you've also been a leader more broadly in the Big Ten. And I'd love if you'd be willing to share a little bit how you've thought about continuing to build and strengthen your professional network over the years. I know you've had some great mentors. I imagine you are a mentor to others today, but would you just tell us a little bit about the Big Ten Fundraising Institute and what that is, why it exists, and if any of our listeners might want to learn more, where they could turn?
Sure. So the Big Ten Fundraising Institute is separate from what some people may know as the Big Ten Development Conference. That's something separate, and I could talk about that if you want. But the Big Ten Fundraising Institute started, I think this is our 59th year. And fortunately, I've not been at all of them. But actually, Daryl Wyrick, my predecessor, the first president of the University of Iowa Foundation, was one of the founding members of the group that started the Big Ten Fundraising Institute. And it was an opportunity, and it preceded really the Big Ten Development Conference, as I understand it. So it was some of the gentlemen who were heads of fundraising back in the 60s at Big Ten institutions saying, we need a way to bring our staff together so they can learn from one another and have best practices and that sort of thing shared amongst one another. And so that proceeded apace. And then the Big Ten Development Conference came on board, where all the Big Ten schools bring together 10 or 12 people each summer, and it's hosted at a different Big Ten institution. So that developed separately. And I would just say over the almost 60 years, the Big Ten Fundraising Institute has evolved to a place where, as of now, the faculty who run it, and we are all volunteers, we pay our own way there, we pay the, we take pride in the fact that this is a voluntary service on our part. And now the Big Ten Institute, Fundraising Institute's restricted to 40 participants each summer. It's an intensive 3.5-day workshop format with 5 faculty members who do all of the sessions, and we bring in an institutional president most years, and also an institutional transformational gift donor as outside, once in a while, consultants to assist with some of the sessions. And we really focus on providing that kind of high-level training that we hope people who will one day replace us need. So we're not talking about how to do annual giving or how do you set up a cool event. We're really talking about the kinds of challenges that leaders face in this sector and how can we most effectively address them? How do we think about them? How do we help our senior teams back at our institutions rise to the challenge of solving those sorts of things? And
when you think about some of those themes, because that is probably not, unfortunately, what people are going to get at most conferences that they might go to.
Right.
And also, I'm guessing most of our audience isn't going to be on the list of 40 who gets to 10 next year. So would you be willing to just share, I don't know, over the last couple of years, what are just some of the topics that have stood out or that even as you think about have been high impact for you? I'd be curious if anything comes to mind.
That does happen to be one of the folders that I brought to my work from home. So the schedule of events for 2020, we always start with a changing advancement landscape in higher ed. And so we have a consultant come in and really talk about the very largest trends. And for example, I remember one of the trends that frightened me most a couple of years ago was when he said that our competition is not one another at other schools or nonprofits. Our competition are people who are setting up their own family foundations because they're putting their money in their family foundations rather than giving it to us as endowments. And then fundraising from the perspective of a university president. So that would be when we bring in a president or a senior academic. We always do a session that we call Ripped from the Headlines. And so we take current events that have been in the news in the last 10 days, right before the start of the conference, and sort of address those from our perspectives. Managing expectations of academic leadership, strategies for managing development programs in a complex organization, a transformational gifts study. Jerry May from Michigan has been on the faculty for a long, long time. This will be the first year that we don't have him, but he would give a stunning reflection on the way that Michigan has raised all the money that they have raised and give some case studies of that. Greatest management challenges. Each faculty member is asked to recount 2 or 3 of their greatest management challenges and to talk about them candidly. Managing your career. So we try to be really direct about helping people think about what they want to do as perhaps their next step in the advancement profession. Recruitment and onboarding and diversity issues, so some more of a talent management focus. Major gift officer metrics. So David Lively has come to be with us, as well as Dondi Cupp for several years to talk about sort of the shift in thinking about major gift officer metrics. How has data changed our decision making? That's always been a really robust and challenging conversation. Planning and funding campaigns. And then we conclude with a conversation with a transformational gift donor. So that's the curriculum for 2020.
Love it. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
And well, I was also wondering, as you think about some of those big trends, and it's almost unfair to ask in light of the current context what big shifts you anticipate over the next 3 to 5, 10 years. But current events notwithstanding, I am curious, you know, for example, there's been this wave of integration that you've been a part of, connecting alumni relations and fundraising, changing org structures, a lot of pain and challenges that you and many peers have gone through. And we're still in the midst of that wave, but it feels like it's become fairly clear, at least for the near term, how that's going to play out, given, I think, the well-understood benefits of integration. Are there other big themes like that you anticipate over the next 5 to 10 years, or too early to say?
Yeah, no, I really think that data analytics is much the same thing. We've devoted 3 full-time positions to, as you know, data science, data analytics, as well as other supporting roles that benefit from the expertise of the amazing staff we were fortunate enough to bring in. And I just think we have to get smarter about the time of our major gift officers and help them be absolutely as laser focused as possible to the potentially best prospects as possible, so that we can make the most effective use of their time. We all know how expensive it is to make an individual donor call, and it is certainly well worth it if it is something that's of interest to that person. But if we can make those more effective, and if we can sort of shorten the time to when someone is able and willing to commence that gift and that support, I think that's next. That's really what I'm sort of counting on there.
Well, I'm banking my career on it, so I'm right there. But I will tell you, it's not only how do we use the data to make the most of gift officers' time. Yes, that is critical. But now, how do we use new mediums as well? And can we be doing that initial discovery conversation via video, because all of a sudden it's become totally acceptable, whereas even a month or two ago it might have seemed foreign to some people, and all of a sudden every staff member has figured out how to do it, and we had put off totally figuring it out on all of our laptops. Well, now we all had to figure it out. And what if you could do, what if you could eliminate unproductive discovery conversations by front loading them in a lower cost, but still personalized medium like we're doing right now. So that's where I'm hopeful that you can take the data and the new approaches to technology to even further laser focus and maximize ROI.
Right. And I think the second thing, and this also is something that you've obviously been helping lots of us think about, is how do we get away from the old annual giving model that is, I'm going to send you 6 letters every year, whether you've ever given to me or not, because you graduated from a particular program, and try and, with a variety of techniques, figure out what people really are interested in at the institution and start asking them for that. So that may even be that may be a little bit like alumni integration. So, we have actually, one of the benefits, we've recently changed our funding model slightly so that the colleges don't have to pay for annual giving out of their budgets, which means it's an expense that we've absorbed, but it also means that we have a little bit more opportunity to develop the annual giving strategies. And so we'll be working hard on that, I would say, for the next 36 months, trying to right size and right strategy that.
Absolutely. And I think as it relates to new approaches, annual giving, major giving, I feel like historically it's been somewhat binary. You're either in a major gift portfolio or you're not. And I think given the good research that somebody like David Lively has done, which has resulted in shrinking portfolios, it's meant that there's an even larger group of unmanaged prospects because the math supports that kind of small portfolio, high touch approach. And so the question that we're all wrestling with is, in the commercial world, the way that you go and close a $5 million sale versus a $500,000 sale versus a $50,000, a $5,000, or a $50 sale, there are so many different shades of how you might engage a market and a prospect. And I think we need more of those shades in advancement that are still cost effective along the way, more personalized than than relying on mass marketing. And your team has been doing great thinking on that topic, and we're excited to continue to test new concepts for sure. I guess one final question that I would have, I want to be sensitive of time, is you've had an opportunity to work with a variety of professionals, both as direct colleagues and as peers across the sector. And I am curious, when you think about the most successful or the most inspiring advancement professionals you've worked with, what stands out? What are the characteristics? I mean, it sounds like for you, it was early on, you just felt that passion and that calling, I think is how you described it. Is that what it takes? I mean, are there people who don't have that calling but are still doing the work? I mean, can you try to synthesize what has really made people the most successful based on your experience?
So perhaps because of my age, and then therefore most of the folks that I know across the country, we're all, approaching or beyond the 60 mark. I would say, I think most of the people that I gravitate to and enjoy and think of as models and mentors are people who have that as a calling. I mean, when I think of Jerry May, or I think of Rhea Turtletaub, or I think of Rod Kirsch, who used to be at Penn State, or, just lots and lots of dear people, those that I have the most respect for really have this as something that is a passion of theirs. Now, there's lots of other things that you have to have other than passion. And part of that is, surrounding yourself with people who do what you don't do well. And I'm really lucky to have some exceptional professionals around me who shore up my many deficiencies. And creating that kind of a team, and knowing that team shifts and changes over time for a variety of reasons is, a reality of a long career. And just figuring out how to adapt to that and how to stay connected with your institutional leadership, and being fortunate, you hope, that they care and respect and support the advancement work that you're doing on behalf of the institution.
I really appreciate you sharing that. And I have to say that we first met at the Big Ten Development Conference at Purdue.
Right.
I was so grateful for the invitation to present to that group. That was a really big moment in our, entrepreneurial journey, kind of getting the opportunity to be on that stage. And I'm really grateful that you said hello afterwards. And it's been a privilege getting to know you and that team. And I have just been so impressed and inspired by your work. And as a native Iowan, I'm just grateful for everything that you all are doing at a local, state, and even national level. And so thank you for making time today in the midst of all of this to share with our audience. And I'm really grateful for that, Lynette.
Well, I look forward to continuing to watch Ever True success, Brent. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.